In this lecture, we are going to be setting up email sending with support for HTML templates. That means that we will be able to pass in variables to an HTML file while sending emails so that we can add images and all other things that we want to add in the email. Right, so for this project, we'll just use a PHP mailer to send email. So the first thing we want to do is to actually composer require it. So we're going to say composer require PHP mailer / PHP mailer. Right now, Composer is going to download the PHP mailer library into our project. Alright, so now that the installation has completed, let's go back to our project and then composer.json. We now have PHP mailer included in the required key. Alright, so what we want to do now is inside of app classes, we are going to create a new class. So just call this mail. The namespace is going to be the same, app classes. Okay, so before we even begin writing any code here, we are going to update our .env file with our email credentials. So let's come here, then put a comment here and say mail credentials. Okay, the first one that we want to do will be the username. So we're going to say email username. Okay, so I'm going to be using Gmail for this. So it's going to be Gmail address. So Gmail _ address yours. Okay, and then the next one is going to be the password. So we're going to say email _ password. Okay, so we're going to just put SSS here. And then the next one is going to be the SMTP port. So SMTP _ port. This is going to be 587 for Gmail. And then the SMTP host. I'm going to say SMTP _ host. This is going to be smtp.gmail.com. And then one more key that I want to add here will be admin email. So we want to email some information to admin, like when there's an error message in production environment, we want to send email to the admin. So this is going to be support@devscreencast.com. All right, so you need to fill this up with your credentials, your Gmail username and your Gmail password. Okay, so right here we need to use the PHP mailer class. So we're going to say use PHP mailer. And then inside of the mail class, we want to have one property. It's going to be a protected property. So we're going to say protected. This property should be mail. And then immediately below that, we want to have our constructor, public function _ construct. And then inside of our constructor, we want to actually initialize our PHP mailer class. So we are going to say this property mail should be equal to a new object of the PHP mailer class. And the next thing that we want to do is to create another method which is called setup, public function setup. Inside of our setup method, we are just going to pass the various properties that are required to use the PHP mailer class. So we're going to say this mail is going to be using SMTP. And then we are going to set the transport to be equal to SMTP. So we're going to say this mailer should be equal to SMTP. Okay, so the next thing we are going to say, we actually require authentication. So we say this mail SMTP auth should be equal to true. And then the next one is to actually specify the encryption type that we're going to be using. So we say this mail SMTP secured going to be equal to TLS. So you can use SSL or TLS depending on your SMTP settings. Our next step now is to actually specify the host. We're going to say this mail host. Okay, so this is going to be equal to get env, then SMTP _ host. Right, so we can always verify what the right argument is by actually checking the env file. So this is SMTP _ host. So the next one is going to be for the port. So we're going to just change this to port. This should be SMTP _ port. All right, so one more thing that I like to check here is when on development environment, I actually want to see if there's any error. So to get more information about the specific error that occurred when we are trying to set email, we should actually turn on the SMTP debug option. So I'm only going to do this if we are not on production environment. So we're going to create a variable here called environment. This is going to be equal to get, right? So the env value that we want to get is going to be equal to app underscore env. Okay, so let's go back to our env file. We have app underscore env here, and the value is set to local. On our production environment, the value here is going to be set to production. Okay, so if the value that I have in this variable environment, so we're going to say if environment is equal to local. Okay, so we are going to enable the SMTP debug. So we're going to say this mail SMTP debug be equal to a value of 2. Okay, we can actually make this a one-liner. And then next, we want to set the authentication information. So it's going to be the username and the password. So we're going to say this mail username should be equal to get env email underscore username. Do the same thing for the password. This mail password should be equal to email underscore password. So you always check to be sure in your env file. So we have email username, email password. Okay, next we want to actually enable the ability to send email as HTML. So we're going to say is HTML should be equal to true. And then one more option that I want to set is this mail single to, and then we're going to set this to be equal to true. Okay, so finally we can actually add the sender information. So we're going to say sender info. So for this we can say this mail sender. Okay, that will be from. Can actually set this to be equal to get env admin underscore email. Okay, so just go back to our env to double confirm. So that's admin underscore email. And then we can also set the from name. So we say from name. And then we can just set this to Acme install. Okay, so this is all we need to do to actually set up our PHP mailer class. Alright, so this is all we need to do to set up the PHP mailer. So once we create a new instance of the mail class, we want to create a new instance of PHP mailer, set it to be equal to this property mail, and then immediately we want to actually call our setup method. So we're going to say this setup. Alright, so we need one more method here. That will be the method that actually sends out the email. So we're going to say public function send. Right, so this is going to accept an array. We just call this data. And then inside of this data array, we are going to pass in the required information, like who we are sending the email to, the subject, the body, and then finally we send the email. So we're going to say this mail add address. It's going to be the person that we are actually sending to. We're going to say add address. So the address is going to be inside of this array, okay? And then we can actually access it. So this is going to be data. Can call it address or can call it to person that we are sending to. And then we can also include the name of the person. Okay, so we can also set this to be available inside of the array that we are passing through. So the next one will be to set a subject. So we can say this mail subject. Okay, so subject, let's start with a capital S, so subject. And then we can set the subject from our array. So we're going to say data subject. Okay, so the next one will be the body of the email. So we're going to say this mail body should be equal to, usually we're just going to pass in a string here, or we just pass in HTML here. Okay, so let's quickly illustrate what we're saying. Come over to public and then create a new HTML file, test email. All right, so usually we're going to pass our email body here. Okay, so this is just an example. Copy this and then come back to mail class. So here we can maybe have a variable here called this body. And then that should now be equal to the string that we copied. And then here we can now refer to that variable body. All right, so this is one way to do it. But what I actually want to do is the ability for us to actually send the email using the file that we created here, test.html. For example, it could be test.php or any other file. So we are going to pass this data. Whatever the data that we are supplying will be inside of here. Okay, so if we want to have an image here, we want to have whatever we want to have, we're going to have it inside of our HTML template, okay? And then we are going to pass that variable into this template and then send the email automatically to the recipient. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to need to delete this from here. Let me delete this. And then come inside of resources, views. I'm going to create a new folder here and I'm going to call this email. So call these emails. So any kind of email that we want to send, we're going to have a specific template for it here. So let's say the first one that we want to create will be welcome. Okay, so welcome.php. And then here we can just put in our HTML. All right, so in order for us to be able to do something like this, we need to actually create a method that is not defined in the PHP mailer class that we can then pass into the body that will do the trick for us. All right, so we'll continue from here in the next lecture.